Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start, before I speak, I'd like to ask the Chamber if we could have a minute's silence for the women who have been killed in the Territory, and since June we've heard there's been 7 women killed. Can I ask?
Is it supported? Does the Chamber support this?
I'd like to start with that. Thank you.
Please be seated.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Continue your comments. Member for Johnston.
In Jewish culture, when someone dies, we say every life is a universe, and we say to the survivors, we wish you long life. I cannot imagine the pain of having someone you love, your sister, your mother, your daughter, your friend, killed by the man who's supposed to be the one who loves her the most. And I can hardly comprehend the size of this problem nationally, where one woman is killed every 4 to 5 days. But as we've heard, and we know that here in the NT, it's even worse. 7 women have been killed in June and 3 women are in intensive care. That's 7 universes. And the domestic homicide rate in the Northern Territory is 7 times higher than the national average, and we know that the majority of these women are Aboriginal women. So I want to acknowledge the women who've been killed, and I also want to acknowledge the courage and the dignity of all of those who stand against domestic, family and sexual violence, who take action to challenge that violence and who hold people who use violence accountable. And I want to acknowledge all the people and organisations who work tirelessly every day in the Northern Territory to prevent and to respond to the domestic, family and sexual violence. Their commitment, skill, experience and wisdom underpins work that is of core value to all of our communities. Domestic, family and sexual violence is overwhelming, but it's not an insurmountable problem. Every single expert says the same thing: domestic, family and sexual violence is preventable, it's not inevitable. And when it does occur, its impacts can be reduced. The evidence tells us that to prevent, reduce and ultimately end domestic, family and sexual violence, we must address its underlying drivers, the things that cause it. The drivers are gender inequality, rigid gender stereotypes, and for Aboriginal communities, the ongoing impacts of dispossession, poverty, colonisation and intergenerational trauma. There's been comprehensive research and work that's been done here in the Northern Territory, which the member for Godja referred to, and it's publicly available. It tells us that the Northern Territory has the highest rates of domestic and family violence related assault, sexual assault and homicide in Australia, that our rates and numbers are increasing year on year, that Aboriginal women make up the majority of victim survivors, the vast majority of people who are committing domestic, family and sexual violence are men, the largest number of reported offences are in the remote areas of the NT, followed by Alice Springs and Darwin, and the highest rates of reported domestic, family and sexual violence are seen in Tennant Creek, Katherine and Alice Springs. We know that less than 10% of domestic, family and sexual violence is ever reported to police. So although the rates are incredibly high, the actual prevalence rates are far higher. And while we all want to see the rates decrease, this is only going to happen in the long term. As the member for Godja said, it may seem counterintuitive, but reported domestic, family and sexual violence will increase in the medium term as a result of improved responses and prevention efforts. I know that we're not sitting by and doing nothing. I know that we have high standard plans in place and experts who've worked tirelessly to address these issues and strong safety mechanisms. And I know we all genuinely want change, and I know there's a strong commitment across this chamber that we create that change together. But what are we missing? What else do we need? This is a complex problem and there's no quick fix. It's one of the most complex problems confronting our government and our community. I've listened to services and spoken to experts, and to me it's clear what we need to do. We need to increase prevention to stop violence before it starts. We need to build community understanding of domestic, family and sexual violence and shift attitudes and behaviours. We need to work with our children and educate them about safe, healthy and respectful relationships from their earliest years. We need more Aboriginal communities and strong elders to be supported to stand up against violence. We need to focus on men's violence. Stopping domestic, family and sexual violence is not possible without interventions with people who are using it. We need to expand men's behaviour change programs. We need men to step up. Men have an important role to play in challenging attitudes and behaviours that condone inequality and domestic, family and sexual violence. Stopping violence against women is not possible without men. We need more early intervention programs that work with young men who are starting to use violence, especially sexual violence, in their intimate relationships. We need to improve crisis accommodation, longer-term housing, counselling and support for victim survivors to reduce the impacts of domestic, family and sexual violence. And we need a strong system response that prioritises safety, respect, compassion and support for victim survivors, including children. We need more safe places for women and children to go, especially in remote communities, and we need more transitional and secure housing for victim survivors to rebuild their lives. We need healing programs for victim survivors. We need specialist responses to children who've seen and heard things that they never should have. We need to support our specialist services and our frontline responders who are faced with the most unimaginable scenes every day. They need training, support, retention systems, and we need to grow our skilled workforce. They need secure funding that keeps pace with the growing demand and not have to spend half their time fighting for their next funding agreement instead of focusing on their clients. We need much more resourcing, as we've heard, and it needs to be ongoing funding based on the actual need. We need this from both the Northern Territory and the Commonwealth. Services have told me that because of the lack of real indexation, their funding has been reduced in real terms by up to 20%. They've also told me that they get short-term one-off contracts rather than sustainable funding. This needs to stop. Drip feeding our services with stop-start trickles of funding does not work. We need to have a peak body for domestic, family and sexual violence services, and we need to support and grow the good things we already have. Things, once again, that we've heard about some of in this chamber. So the family safety framework in Alice, Darwin, Catherine, Yuendamu, Tennant and Nhulunbuy, where services come together to make risk management plans for victim survivors at serious risk. The risk assessment and management framework that guides all workers in a shared practice to help them work together, keep people who commit domestic, family and sexual violence in view and keep victim survivors safe using evidence-based tools. And our hard-working, stretched women's crisis services and men's behaviour change programs. We need to address harmful alcohol use. I want to be clear that on its own, alcohol does not cause violence because violence occurs where alcohol is not involved and because many people consume alcohol but are never violent. However, across Australia for both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, alcohol can weaken people's capacity for positive and respectful behaviour and can contribute to the likelihood and severity of violence. We need leadership, and that's what we're hearing in this room now, true long-term commitment to domestic, family and sexual violence, not to be treated as a party political issue. We need long-term investment across election cycles. This is especially important because domestic, family and sexual violence reform requires generational change. We need to listen to and respect the research and evidence, the specialist expertise and the lived experience from those who've courageously and generously shared their personal stories. We need to learn from the tragic stories of the women and children who have suffered and died in the Northern Territory as a result of domestic family and sexual violence. We need a systematic domestic family violence death review process as other jurisdictions have. The evidence base for domestic family and sexual violence reform is a fast-growing one, with new research being released every day. 5 years ago, no one knew what coercive control was, and now it's a household term, and this is helping women all over the world understand that just because he didn't hit you, it doesn't mean it's not domestic violence. And most importantly, as we're hearing in this chamber, we need to work together. A coordinated response is essential because of the serious risks of domestic family and sexual violence, which may be exacerbated by a siloed approach. We need to do this together. Parties working together, government working across government, agency working with agency, sector with sector, service with service, because domestic family and sexual violence brings people, children and families into contact with multiple parts of the service system, including domestic family sexual violence services, police, justice, housing, children and family services, child protection and health. If these systems work in a fragmented way, our work will be ineffective. And if we're not coordinated, we're creating more opportunities for victim survivors to be seriously injured or killed and for perpetrators to fall through the cracks. If we want to solve the crime problem in the Northern Territory, we need to pour everything into addressing domestic family and sexual violence, because police report that 2/3 of the assaults in the Northern Territory are domestic and family violence related. If we want to solve homelessness, we need to address domestic family sexual violence, because this is the main reason women and children leave their homes and the most common reason for seeking assistance from homelessness services in the Northern Territory. If we want to reduce our prison numbers, we need to address this, because 2/3 of prisoners are held for domestic family violence related offences. If we want to reduce the strain on our police officers, we need to address this, because police respond to over 100 domestic family sexual violence incidents every single day. If we want to stop youth crime, we need to address this, because domestic family violence is also a strong indicator for children entering the criminal justice system. And if we want to fix up our economy, we need to address this, because domestic family violence costs $21.7 billion in Australia every year. The cost of the domestic family sexual violence in the Northern Territory has been calculated at close to $600 million a year. These are the costs of our police, our prison systems, our courts, our hospitals, our child protection systems, which are spending most of their time responding to domestic family and sexual violence. And if we want to close the gap, we need to address this, because it's the leading cause of Aboriginal children being placed in out-of-home care nationally. I'm heartened to hear the bipartisan commitment across this chamber to address this issue that does affect every single one of us. Every life is a universe. Every woman killed is a universe lost to her friends, her family and her community, and we cannot afford to ignore this. Thank you.